Welcome everybody to the monthly meeting of the New York City Neighborhood Naturalist Group. My name is Lydia Paradiso, and I'm a doctoral student at the New York Botanical Garden and a graduate fellow with the New York City EcoFlora project. Neighborhood naturalists monitor and advocate for biodiversity in their communities. They document plants, animals, fungi, microorganisms, and ecological processes using scientific methods that are free, open source, and archival. Neighborhood naturalists help educate and inform their neighbors about biodiversity, and they communicate biodiversity concerns to their local governments. Neighborhood naturalists are encouraged to attend community board meetings, especially parks and environment committees in their local community district. Since November 2018, this group has regularly attended Community Board 7 Parks and Environment Committee meetings, which there will be one held this evening after this, after our talk. Where they have provided informed testimony regarding the impacts of specific projects on biodiversity and ecosystem health. Members of our group have successfully advocated for the use of bird-safe glass in the design of the 79th Street Rotunda renovation in Riverside Park, advocated for the increased use of native plants in New York City Parks landscape designs, and informed board members of the harmful effects of light pollution. All New York City nature lovers are encouraged to join the New York City EcoFlora project on iNaturalist as community scientists to observe, collect, and compile information about the city's plants and their relationships with other organisms such as bird, insects, and fungi. Since the project began in 2017, over 20,000 New Yorkers have documented 10,287 species of plants, animals, and microorganisms. On February 13th, 2021, we reached 500,000 observations, and since then, we have made over 150,000 additional observations. Additionally, as part of the EcoFlora project, each month we highlight a particular plant or group of plants through an EcoQuest challenge. The EcoQuest for October is entitled Search for Solanum. Solanum in the nightshade family is one of the largest genera of flowering plants with between 1,500 and 2,000 species, including the popular plants tomato, potato, and eggplant. In New York City, there are at least 3 commonly encountered species: Solanum carolinense, also known as Carolina horse nettle, which is a native species; Solanum dulcamara, also known as bittersweet nightshade, which is a non-native; and Solanum nigrum, also known as black nightshade, which is a complex of a few different species, some of which are native and some which are non-native. So far this month, there have been 183 observations of 7 different species of Solanum throughout New York City. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Rachel Meyer. Rachel is an assistant adjunct professor and director of the California Environmental DNA program at UC Santa Cruz. Her lab strives to advance biomonitoring using DNA from ancient sediment to soil on nature preserves to plant genomes. She also makes biodiverse cocktails and co-wrote the book Botany at the Bar. Meyer obtained her PhD in 2012 from the CUNY-NYBG joint PhD program, went on to do an NSF Plant Genome postdoctoral fellowship at NYU, and then joined the National Science Foundation as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. At NSF, she became fascinated with new non-invasive techniques to track plants, animals, and microbes with DNA, and moved to Los Angeles to become executive director of the UC Conservation Genomics Consortium, where she helped launch an environmental DNA citizen science program, CALeDNA. She joined the faculty of UC Santa Cruz Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology in 2019 and is a PI in the UCSC Paleogenomics Lab led by Beth Shapiro. Rachel's talk today will share some of her research on the ethnobotany, genetics, and chemistry of eggplant and other Solanum species. Please feel free to enter any questions or comments you might have during or after the talk into the chat. And at the conclusion, we'll go through as many questions as we're able before concluding at 6:25 to attend the Parks and Environment Committee meeting, whose agenda tonight includes a presentation on spotted lanternfly by an entomologist from Rutgers University. And so now, without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Meyer.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Lydia, and thank you all for being here. I've been just geeking out on the other talks that you've hosted and the YouTube videos and feeling really intimidated because I say a lot compared to all of them, but they are fantastic resources for education. So I really appreciate all the work that you do to build this community and make so much great botanical information accessible to the public. So I'll share my screen. I'll get going. All right, so I'm going to be talking to you about nightshades, but mainly about eggplants because that's what I focused on for my PhD. So you're stuck with that. And I'll be trying to make this fun and include a couple of creepy things because it's October, the best month of the year, my birthday month, and it's Halloween. So let's get into it. The domestication, nutrition, and ethnobotany of eggplants and some other nightshades, strange tales from the field and the lab. So most people, when they think of eggplant in New York City, talk about their grandmother's eggplant Parmesan recipe. And I can't tell you how many, if I mentioned that I was studying eggplant, how many people would just instantly go there. But I was mainly working on Asian eggplant for my PhD when I was a student at the New York Botanical Garden and City University of New York Graduate Center in 2006 to 2012. And I've continued some work on eggplant since, but I'm going to really kind of start with and focus on mainly what I did then and kind of build on that. So eggplants have an ancient origin in the old world, in Asia, in South and in East Asia and in Southeast Asia. And we can credit a lot of their domestication and records that we know of about their domestication to great archaeological evidence, as well as historical artworks and different other historical records. So this is Emperor Wu from the Eastern Han Dynasty, who 2,000 years ago was based sort of headquartered in Chengdu, which is in Southwest China, but still a temperate area. And Emperor Wu sent his armies into tropical China, into Yunnan province, to control the people there and assimilate them into Han culture. And in the tropics, people ate most foods raw. We're eating raw, wild, or domesticated eggplants. And that didn't really fit into Han culture. Han culture boiled their food. And so when you think of going to a new place and finding other fruits and vegetables that you're not necessarily familiar with and trying to bring them into your own culture, your own technology and cuisine, that's often when we see some really extraordinary evolutionary trajectories change, some really cool domestication processes. So this was a paper that came out in 2008 by Sandy Knapp and her collaborators in China, who had found these early artworks and documents of people from the Eastern Han Dynasty in tropical China, bringing back eggplant into Chenghu Basin, that reported that eggplant was not very palatable and was small, and then they gradually domesticated it to have larger fruits and to be more and more delicious, eventually being so large that you could stuff it with goat tail and orange rinds. And this became one of the emperor's favorite foods. That was a later emperor. This was a couple hundred years later. So we go from domesticating these little fruits to domesticating something that's large that you could really use as sort of like a dumpling. And we think of this as like also going from crunchy, that you would eat, something that you would eat more like an apple, to something that's very soft and spongy. So here are some photographs. These are, I believe, from a reference that I have later on this slide from Lynn Bowes, who I think is on this presentation right now. These are images of what wild eggplants look like. This is Solanum insanum. There's also Solanum incanum. There's a huge, there's a bunch of different names that have been applied to wild eggplants and to domesticated eggplants. As you know, economic species, people like to name things. And I am not in phylogenetics anymore, so I'm not going to get into that battle at all. But wild eggplants, there's not very much of that sort of spongy tissue. So the pericarp really expanded through domestication. Wild eggplants are very prickly, especially on the calyx around the fruit. And those prickles are actually very easy to domesticate away because they're actually controlled by a single gene. Some of that, I believe, was work from Jaime Prohens in Valencia. And they're green before they're immature, and then at maturity, they turn yellow. And if you were to ever leave your garden eggplants alone to let them ripen, they would also turn that type of yellow as well, even if they start out purple. So here, if you go to tropical China, to those areas where Emperor Wu sent his armies, you still see actually a lot of these maybe more old traditional varieties that still retain their small size, wouldn't make for very good dumplings. You can't put a goat tail in here. But these are domesticated, these are advanced domesticated varieties that fit into tropical cuisine, often like the Dai minority groups cuisine. And here are some examples of what we do with eggplants that we buy in the grocery store that are largely like the Italian varieties, but they're very easy to stuff, right? And delicious. In India, we also have a historical record of eggplants that goes back equally old to China, at least 2,000 years in the Charaka and Sushruta Samhitas. And those were texts, ancient texts that were describing the medicinal uses of eggplant and different properties of different varieties. And then if you go over to Southeast Asia and into like around Malaysia and Indonesia, an area we would call Malaysia, you have lots of eggplant varieties as well. You have a lot of small varieties, a lot of these white varieties. Some of them we call subspecies of Vigerum. And this is why these varieties are some of what people refer to as garden eggs, which may be the origin of the word eggplant. And this is a cute picture I just found online. But these small varieties of eggplant, I always thought were really interesting because did we domesticate eggplants to be bigger? And then as those big eggplants moved throughout East Asia into Southeast Asia, people made them smaller again? Or are these independently domesticated eggplants? Where did we get all of this varietal diversity from? The taste is slightly different. The chemical composition that I'll get into in a little while is slightly different. And it's just really cool to see this outstanding varietal diversity that we can get within a single species. So eggplants and their ancestry are complicated. And if you would like to review some of this, a really good synopsis of that is the Eggplant Origins out of Africa into the Orient paper that came out in 2010 by Weiss and Bose. But there are wild species that are in Africa, have different, sometimes sympatric biogeography that may have moved by humans or by natural occurrence into South and East Asia that had been also moved around possibly by humans or possibly just because they had naturally spread around or by animals, had moved around, had been gradually domesticated, and then these sort of early domesticates could have been moved around, could have rehybridized or fertilized into different forms, and then been fully domesticated into the eggplants, the largest eggplants that we have access to today. So lots of different moving around this continent. So, or two continents. In 2019, I was able to collaborate with Mark Chapman's group at Southampton, and we did GBS as well as RNA sequencing to try to understand these Malaysian eggplants, these little garden eggs, and if they were feral or hybridized, or if they were really their own lineage. And what we saw was that the little white garden egg ones are the ovigerums are purple here in this tree. And we saw that they were often genetically very close to these Solanum and Sanums, or sort of the wild forms of eggplant, and looked like they were hybrids. So it was like people took domesticated eggplant and hybridized them intentionally with wild relatives that were in the area to make these special varieties. And we saw similar support for that in the RNA-seq data as well. So we can stand back and appreciate this really astounding biodiversity that we have of different forms, different colors, different flavors. And we also have things that we call eggplants, but they're different species. You probably can buy these at Trader Joe's right now. These are Solanum ethiopicum. They're African eggplants. Sometimes they're called the GILO eggplants because they're also very popular in Brazil. Slaves brought them to South America from Africa. And they're very bitter. You have to cook them. There's specific ways to cook them, or maybe you just like bitterness. We can get into bitter as a whole other side conversation. They're a little too bitter for my palate, but if you cook them when they're young, they're all right. They have absolutely beautiful shapes. So we use them often as ornamental because they look like little pumpkins, which is why you can buy them at Trader Joe's in the flower section. And then there's Solanum macrocarpon. This one's really cool. This is the Boma eggplant, G-B-O-M-A eggplant, domesticated in Africa as well. We don't know for this and for Solanum ethiopicum, I don't think we have a good record of when domestication started, but that would be certainly a really exciting topic to follow up on. And if anyone else knows about that, has done more research recently or is in progress with that, I would love to connect with you. So these are pretty cool. You can see this oversized calyx that wraps around the fruit. These were actually originally documented to have been domesticated for edible leaves that you could use as like a pot herb for stews. By the way, a lot of times we start with domestication focusing on one thing, like, oh, we'll make edible leaves, but then we realize, oh, eventually I've developed a way to bring fruit into my diet as well. So we developed that technology. Same thing happened for maize. For teosinte, does not have anything similar to a corn kernel whatsoever. We domesticated that. We started using that heavily for the leaves, for edible vegetative tissue, and eventually selected to be able to eat the corn. So pretty cool. So here people do eat these fruits, but they were originally domesticated for leaves. And so you could use both on the plant. Eggplants are debatable in their nutrition. One thing that I can say about them is that 50 eggplants on average equals the equivalent of nicotine for a single cigarette, which is kind of cool. Highest amount of nicotine that you can get from anything that you would eat. That references the Simpsons tobacco episode. They do have fiber, they have a little bit of protein, they do have some caloric contribution. But it's funny because the Bengali word for them is begun, which can mean it has no value, as in it is free to give away, you'll never make money on it, or it's got no value because it has no nutritional value. And so people argued this a lot when I was in the field. A lot of people say don't eat eggplants because like other nightshades, they have a lot of these steroids in them, and that can be very irritating, especially if you have arthritis. You're advised often by your doctors not to eat nightshades. Eggplants are particularly nasty with this. So there's a lot of resources online about what to avoid. And yeah, so the Jain people, also one of the most peaceful religions in the world, actually consider eggplant, from what I've read, have considered eggplant closest to an animal out of the plants that are eaten. And so they don't eat eggplant. And one of the Indian terms for eggplant is ektaki murgi, or one-legged chicken. So you can kind of picture eggplants could kind of look like a one-legged chicken, but it just sort of refers to that, to their animal qualities. And this doesn't really pertain to like that they are high in protein or anything, but that they increase heat in the body. So if you pay attention to some Eastern medicines where you can like shang shui, right? Like you can increase heat, or you have to cool your body down to, and this relates to Ayurvedic practices where you're trying to rebalance yourself, or to Chinese medicine where you're trying to usually reduce heat unless you're one of those people that's too cold. I'm definitely in the too hot range usually. Eggplant often increases heat, which is what animal protein does. So that might be a reason that we would avoid eggplant, because we could treat it like an animal for what it does to our bodies in Chinese medicine and in other medicinal systems. So eggplant chemistry, let's get into it, and the chemistry of other nightshades. I'm focusing mainly on the spiny solanums, which are sort of a very messy group. But if we look at different species, we see incredible diversity of chemical composition. We even see tryptophan, like the amino acid that you can get in turkey that makes you feel really tired after Thanksgiving meal. Really incredible chemical diversity. And a lot of these chemicals, while they're very good for you, like chlorogenic acid, it's something that's in coffee. It's a really great antioxidant, generally really good for you. Some of these are very rare to find, like cucoamine A, which is in some wild African relatives of eggplant, and occasionally similar compounds to that and cucoamine A are found in ovidurum. So these are really cool compounds that are good for blood pressure. So they're antihypertensive, and they're actually some of the most desirable compounds if you're trying to take if you have hypertension and you're trying to take medication right now. So very interesting source of really powerful compounds. And I was able to do a lot of phytochemical research when I was doing my PhD with the USDA with Bruce Whitaker, who's now retired, but Shibia Wu is a super badass with Solanum chemistry and was a great collaborator on this. More things about eggplant medicine and how we might be leveraging that incredible chemical diversity, particularly for the steroids, is that one of the most ancient and persevering uses of eggplant is to smoke them for toothache. And that is not to smoke them like a joint, but it's to smoke like actually like smoke on the grill, like char the seeds, char the fruits, grind that up into a powder, and then put that powder on your gums to get rid of toothache. It will reduce inflammation. It's a steroid. It's like cortisone. And a lot of the chemicals, the anti-inflammatory chemicals and the steroids are concentrated around the seeds. So this is an image of people producing this charred eggplant powder. And that might be one of the most conserved medicinal uses of eggplants around the world, or at least around Asia. So when I got to do interviews all around Asia of how people use eggplants for medicine, I frequently found people shared that use, the smoke the seeds use, but I often didn't hear other uses that were shared. So most of the medicinal uses for eggplant seem to be restricted to one region of the world. Ötzi, I don't know if you've heard of Ötzi, the Iceman. I think a little over 1,000 years ago, he was running from someone in the Alps, kind of at the intersection of Germany, France, and Switzerland, and he got a heart attack and died. So he was shot with a bow and arrow a couple times, and all sorts of other things. He was injured, and he just didn't make it. Ötzi's terribly cursed, by the way. Halloween story for you. The person who found Ötzi ended up dying in the Alps, hiking in celebration that he had finally won this lawsuit to be able to get the financial benefits of learning from Ötzi. People say that if you touch any part of Ötzi's body, that you will also be cursed and die a terrible death. And I am terrified because joining the Paleogenomics Lab at Santa Cruz, there is actually a piece of Ötzi somewhere in the freezer in our lab up on main campus. And everyone's always afraid that they're accidentally going to run into it. And no one really knows exactly where it is, but there's a piece of him there. Really, really creepy. Really creepy, I'll be honest. But let's see, I bring him up because he carried pouches of medicinal plant products with him on his journey. And we can learn a lot about past medicines from findings like this. So he actually had eggplant seeds. We're not sure if they were wild or domesticated or a relative, but he had eggplant seeds with him, probably because he had toothaches. And this was a common thing for people to use. And so that's in Europe, right? That's after that knowledge had traveled out of Asia. So I'm really interested in these uses, medicinal and food uses, these technologies that we develop around our plant knowledge and how we share them and how we innovate them. And I'll just geek out for a minute here on how we can categorize those. So there's primary or pristine domestication or innovation, where you're the first one to discover something. And then there's demic diffusion, where you're actually migrating somewhere else. And so you're physically bringing that knowledge somewhere else. There's cultural diffusion, where your inspiration of culture, maybe the spread of religion, you're not physically moving, but your knowledge systems and technology and culture is moving. So cultural diffusion can spread innovation and domestication. And then there's also stimulus diffusion. An example I frequently use for this is Egyptian cotton and Nubian cotton. So you can look over and say, well, hey, these people are making a ton of money by trading this stuff. We have a similar plant over here. Why don't we start cultivating that and using it for export and get some financial gain? So you might see a dye or a food and take your own similar species and start to domesticate them because of some stimulus that has inspired you. So I was looking at these during my thesis research. I was looking at all of these different uses for eggplant throughout Asia, trying to understand, okay, well, where was pristine innovation? What was demic diffusion and cultural diffusion for all of these eggplant uses? And I got to travel all over India and China and the Philippines and Taiwan, and it was really, really, really fun. Some of my favorite uses I will share with you. A lot of people were using eggplant to treat skin cancer, and they would actually use a wash. You could use the leaves as a rash wash. That's frequently done in colder parts of China. And you see online, right? So this is interviewing rural farmers, and then you go online and you see white chicks that are doing the same thing. Who knows how they got that information, where it's been passed on from. But people are using eggplants to treat all sorts of different skin ailments. I'm not saying that it necessarily works. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just reporting what people say. And people use eggplants in Taiwan. They'll take slices of eggplants, put them on their face to get rid of freckles, but freckles are super cute. If you have freckles, keep your freckles. But eggplant is tyrosinase inhibiting and it will inhibit the production of melanin. So there are chemical backups, like chemical evidence that it does affect this pathway and would lighten your skin. I apologize about the graininess of this picture, but Marie-Christine Donnet, a couple of years ago, published a really nice paper on medicinal and ritual and artistic kind of cultural diversity uses of eggplants in Europe, and how it was used as an aphrodisiac. I think it's hilarious considering the eggplant meme use now these days. Some really other cool images of other nightshades. Here's mandrake. And in India, eggplants often, and Solanum torvum and other nightshades are often used. They're kind of swapped for each other these days, as some of the wild eggplants are harder to find in the formula dasamula, which is a combination of 10 ingredients that's very good for cough and asthma and all sorts of different ailments. So one of the things that's been really interesting to watch and also kind of gives me pause is as we're losing wild species access because species are becoming more rare, or climate change is causing them to migrate uphill because they're losing suitable habitat, or because human impact is hurting them. As we're losing species access, we often have to say, well, shoot, I have this one ingredient that I really need. Well, what can I swap in its place? And so we have species substitutions. Species substitutions, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, doesn't necessarily mean it's a duck. So I caution people, if you are going to substitute one thing for another in a medicinal formula, really look into the chemistry and make sure that it has the same active constituents that you're looking for and nothing bad that you would accidentally be swapping in. Most people don't have an HPLC or an LCMS TUF at home. So it's really hard to know when is a species swap going to be all right and give me the same effects. We also see the loss of wild eggplants in Taiwan. They used to be an important part of Rukai headdresses, and they're no longer accessible. So people have switched to using Solanum torvum, which is not native to Taiwan, but it's everywhere now. And torvum's really fun. We see it around New York sometimes as well. So I would add that to your list of Solanums to look out for. If you eat the fruits, which are really delicious to grill, and they're the little eggplants that you can get in Thai cuisine. Sometimes they're in curries or soups. So they're little green, kind of pebble-sized fruits, and they make water taste sweet when you drink them, when you eat them and then you drink water, which is really fun. I love examples like that where we get sweetness. And then, so we've lost headdresses, and then this is a picture of, this is an image. If you were to look up Fiji and cannibalism, this is an image that comes up. Cannibalism hasn't been practiced since the 1930s, I believe, but there is a domesticated eggplant relative in Fiji called the cannibal's tomato, or Solanum uporo, or Solanum anthropophagorum. This is what the cannibal's tomato allegedly looks like. I've never been able to see one. People keep sending me cannibal's tomato seeds as gifts, which I'm very thankful to them for, but usually I start to grow them and I realize they are Solanum aethiopicum. And I know that other people that have tried to do systematic analysis of these have struggled to find germplasm that's actually the Fijian species. So this may or may not be, this is a species swap, unintentional species swap, where we're using the Hilo eggplant, the African eggplants that look like pumpkins. We're using those we're pretending that those are the cannibal's tomato, but they're not. And there are other experts that can talk about this much more than I can, but I think it's really fascinating and kind of scary to think of how amazing this fruit is that we've potentially lost, or a lot of people think that they have germplasm around the world, that they're keeping this secure, but they're actually, they have the wrong species. So I'd like to put a call out to anyone who's going to Fiji or thinks that they have actual cannibal's tomato, like, let it be known, because we really should conserve all of this biodiversity. Cannibal's tomato was made into a sauce, and human meat, I had to do some translation of cannibal recipes that were in German some years ago, has to sit out for a couple of days so that the soul is completely gone. And there's a special fork that you use to eat it with. And there's a special sauce that accompanies it, which is made out of cannibal's tomato. And it is supposed to help you with digestion because human meat is apparently very hard to digest. And I thought this was really, really interesting, because if you go to Xishuangbanna, back to tropical China, where people take eggplants and eat them raw, some of the eggplant relatives, including Solanum americanum and lots of other nightshades, people will make into sauce that they use to accompany raw meat. Remember, a lot of ingredients are eaten raw here in tropical China. So if you go to Xishuangbanna, if you want to eat raw beef, better have the right sauce to go with it. Otherwise, it might be a little tough on your stomach. So one of the species substitutions that we see more and more, and you'll see it in New York from time to time too, is Solanum viarum, or the Brazilian soda apple. This looks kind of similar to the wild eggplants that we had seen earlier, or some of those small domesticated eggplants from Thailand and from Southeast China, Southeast Asia, but it's not. These are from Brazil. They're also prickly. They have much larger prickles. They have hairier leaves. They're in a different section of the spiny nightshades. And so they actually have this sort of more pronounced leaf margins, more sort of edgy angled leaf margins, not soft leaf margins like Solanum melongena or eggplant. So I was finding these in the field from time to time and saying, like, well, maybe it's not so bad that they're using this instead in Dasamula and some of these other formulas, because it looks like it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, maybe it's a duck. But turns out, I found out that it puts holes in your brain. Don't eat it. Goats have died from eating a lot of the Solanum viarum, and goats, we know, eat everything. I love this picture. Horses sometimes die from eating too much nightshade. And Solanum viarum is a weed all over the world now, and it's a threat to your livestock. Don't let it be a threat to you too. If you see it, don't try to eat it because it looks like other nightshades that are edible. So when I said to Sherbiao, hey, I've got a lot of this that I ate and I feel like, you know, there might be some really bad side effects. What the hell was in that plant? We can look back at our original paper, Solanum viarum, and we see that it has some really different types of chemicals. We actually published 2 papers on the novel chemicals in Solanum viarum that hadn't been characterized before. So we at one point put together a whole bunch of different nightshades, different solanums, and analyzed their chemistry with LCMS TOF, and tried to look at how similar in composition the chemicals were in all of these different types of nightshades and how they sort of parsed out. So what was really obvious is like food and not food is not a great way to separate out groups. Like if you're not used as a food, maybe you could be used as a food because you have very similar chemistry, overall chemistry, to some of the food crops in Solanum. There was some, like the group, the subgenus group that you're in does help you cluster together chemically, which makes total sense. So all the geminatas are together, Lasiocarp is all over the place. Melangina has incredible diversity. So this is the green is eggplant diversity here, this blue-green. And Old World and New World, though, the Old World plants, the ones that are native to the Old World, are completely discernible chemically from the New World plants. So think about the origin, and if you're going to swap something in, at least try to make it Old World or New World, make it match in origin to what you're replacing. So I'm going to start to wrap up my talk, but I just want to say, like, if we stand back and we think about, wow, humans have domesticated a lot. We have had tons of innovation. This is my favorite onion piece ever, botanist holding up the salad bar, right? Humans are fascinated by plants. What is it? How can I use it? So we should think about all of the species that are exploited for food around the world. It's about 10% of the plants out there are eaten or used as medicine or used as utility plants. And we've domesticated thousands of those. How do we continue to diversify our diets and to diversify the plants that we just appreciate and use for ritual, for food, for medicine, for cosmetics? Because if you don't use it, you lose it. And the more uses that we can have for plants, the more that we can help ensure their conservation into the future. So I'd like us to start thinking about, well, what are the nightshades around us? And like, could you actually domesticate them for anything? For example, Solanum americanum, which is very similar to Solanum nigrum. Solanum americanum grows all over New York. That is used in Taiwan to sober you up if you want to be instantly sober. There's also some kind of sexual uses for it as well, but I won't go into detail on those. So we can try to imagine for nightshades what you can use all of this extreme chemical diversity for and different morphological diversity for. So let's think about what we want to improve for our future. And I encourage you all to go to Plants for a Future. It's a great website, great resource. Please donate to them. And you can look up Solanum and you can learn all about the medicinal food qualities and toxicity of different nightshades and some of the plants that are really going to be good for the earth if we encourage their use more. For example, the tree tomato that grows at the New York Botanical Garden in the conservatory is a plant that is low, requires very little input, produces fruit year round, and for some reason is super popular in New Zealand, but it has some really beautiful fruits with black and purple colored flesh. So I'd like to thank NYBG and the CUNY Graduate Center and all of you and tons of other people that I don't have time to thank individually for all of their support over the years. We've recently published a book chapter on eggplant nutrition. It's part of the Eggplant Genome. And I really hope to continue to be paying attention to what's going on in nightshades as I'm starting to build up my research program here at UC Santa Cruz. Thanks.
Great talk. That was very interesting. I learned a lot. And I'm sure everyone else did too. Here, let me try and put back the, there we go. It'll unpin the anything.
I do see some comments.
Yes. Yeah, we've got some comments and some questions in here. So we can just here, let's do this. So there's a question from Tool Hazelrig who asked if steroids in eggplants reduce inflammation, why are they then thought to be bad for arthritis?
That is a question beyond my medical expertise, which is zero. But I do think that some of the compounds are rather agitating, and there's it's funny. I really don't understand this component, because also eggplants are used to treat asthma. It's similar to so there's a beneficial component to the steroids, but also a negative component to the steroids. And maybe someone else has expertise on this that can weigh in from the group here.
But I'm sure also there's probably some interplay where there's so many different compounds in the one plant that it's not just one thing that's going to have
solanine, phyllacidine, solamarginine. You have a whole bunch of different compounds, and also your preparation of them is going to be different. I would imagine if you're cooking the hell out of your eggplants, you're not going to have that many steroids left. Or if you're soaking them first with salt and with water, then you're going to remove a lot of those steroidal alkaloids.
And that looks like it answers another question that we have from Daniel that asked, does salting and washing eggplant take away the bitterness? And if so, how come?
Yeah, those are water-soluble compounds. So that's part of how you're getting rid of them. One of the ways that I thought was fascinating about how to preserve the good compounds. So a lot of the good compounds are these phenolic compounds. As soon as the cells break, the vacuole breaks, you have this polyphenolic oxidase that is a protein that's going to eat away all the beneficial compounds. So sometimes in the field, we would actually take eggplants and pop them in the microwave for a minute, just to kill all of the proteins, and make them inactive, so that we could preserve the beneficial compounds. The bitterness is not actually that much contributed by the steroidal alkaloids, as far as I understand, but from the saponins in eggplant, which are also not good for you. And maybe those are the reasons that those are some of the things that are not good for you if you have arthritis, come to think of it. So it's very easy to check if you're growing a couple of varieties of eggplant and you want to check, do I have these bitter saponins in my fruits? You can chop up some eggplant, put it in a vial or in a tube or in a glass with some water. Do this the same way for your couple of varieties, and then shake it up and see how many bubbles are produced. So that'll give you an idea of the bitterness, the saponin content in your eggplant varieties. And that's actually the way that they do this in the lab, which is very nice because it's very simple to do at home.
Very cool.
And those are also water soluble.
So would the saponins are one of the compounds that would make that imparts the bitterness.
That's the main thing that imparts the bitterness. So we've made eggplants less bitter through time, but we've also reduced, through domestication, we've reduced a lot of their health beneficial compounds. And there are groups of people that are continuing to study eggplants and other solanums that are working on breeding those health beneficial compounds back into our eggplant varieties that we can buy at the grocery store through molecular targeted hybridization. Hopefully one day with CRISPR. Yeah, there's some really cool, there's some really cool capacity to make more healthful crops.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, kind of the pros and cons of domestication of some of these crops is that the more that we kind of make them, more tasty or more delicious, or, the pretty colors or something that we're selecting for, that it's also selecting against some of these other beneficial kind of things. So that's why it's so important to study the wild crop relatives and to keep up, make sure that we're not losing all that diversity, that there's, all those other things too.
Yeah.
I had a question that I wonder if you know about the coloration. You had mentioned, that if you were to leave everyone, I feel like we think of eggplants as, you know, the dark purple, but that if you do leave them long enough that they'll change and turn to a more green color. Like what kind of is the chemistry behind that, and does that then change it?
Eggplant skin has some really great anthocyanins in it. I think it's delphinidin and naringenin. There's like 3 or 4 of our some really good anthocyanins, but they're not the most color stable anthocyanins. They're also, unfortunately, not the ones that change color with acid, so you can't do party tricks with them. But I will tell you, check out Lycium, Lynn, I'm looking at you again, because wolfberries, the black wolfberry that you can often buy, you can buy it on Amazon, you can buy it in most Taiwanese grocery stores. The black wolfberry makes a really beautiful bright blue color that is very pH sensitive. So similar to cabbage extract, you can make different colors of the rainbow with it. So because they're not very stable anthocyanins, they'll degrade. It's similar to just, you know, things get old, they're not maintained anymore, and those compounds are gone as the plants age.
Because that's also perhaps a good way to know when they're you know, ready for harvest.
Yeah. The more you let the fruits age, the more those protective compounds are going to accumulate around the seeds. Some people don't like that because you also end up getting more bitter compounds as well. But yeah, similar to red peppers, totally. Yeah, this is very common in nightshades. But yeah, so you just have to think about like, what's your intention of how you're going to use that fruit? Are you using it medicinally, or are you using it as a food? What's your food preparation? I really also am a big fan of the camo eggplant. If you like the dark purple color, camo is a protected traditional variety from Kyoto from over 500 years. They've been protecting that variety. You can buy the camo eggplant seeds from Kitazawa Seed Company, and that is a larger eggplant, sort of a dumbbell shaped eggplant. It's black, it's got a black calyx with prickles on it, so it's really beautiful. And you can eat it like an apple, where it's not bitter and it's very crunchy. Delicious. Cannot complain. Eggplants are great. See, any ideas about what disperses eggplant fruits in the wild? Oh my gosh, lots of mammals, rodents, birds. There's so much that eats eggplants, and eggplant seeds. I wonder if that's similar to peppers, to chili. Like when birds eat chilies, don't they vomit out the seeds? I learned that recently and it blew my mind. It's like when we find out that cows don't actually like fart methane, that they burp it. Just like, wait, what? So yeah, I'm not sure. What have you seen eating eggplants in your garden? I always thought mammals were the main culprits, and I was always fighting them off when I was growing lots of eggplants in New York.
Nice. I'm very inspired now to see if I can find any other kind of eggplant varieties or to try, because I feel like I've only ever encountered the right kind of eggplant parmesan kind of variety. And I'm sure that, you know, a place like New York City is a good location to be able to find some of these different kind of exotic.
I see a comment on Solanum virginianum from Sri Lanka. That is one of the dasamula ingredients. That's a really important Asian variety, Asian species. It's really, really cool. I do encourage people to grow that and try it for medicine.
So is that, do you know where the virginianum that name comes from? So it is a native old world species?
I'm not even sure who the author of that is, if anyone wants to chime in.
Sometimes it can give you a clue, but sometimes it's just confusing.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then also for other horticultural species that are fun in nightshades, there's Solanum mammosum, the one that is often called nipple fruit. It's really beautiful. And that one's also yellow. I'm just trying to throw all the weird stuff at you. So there's so many eggplants. There are so many really strange uses of them. In the Philippines, people talked often about if someone is pregnant but trying to hide their pregnancy, that feed them eggplant because if you want them to show, because they'll start showing faster. Eggplants were also something maybe again attributing to the anti-inflammatory compounds in them. After you've given birth, it was good for you to eat lots of eggplant to help the mother recover.
Interesting. We've got another comment in here asking, what about baby eggplant?
Oh, it's, yeah, like, is it like baby corn or baby carrots, where they're actually not what they seem? Baby eggplant, you could eat really young eggplants that are meant to get bigger, but they're not going to be very good yet. The baby eggplants, the small eggplants, are bred to remain small. And in Spain, in addition to Southeast Asia, like the Malaysia, Indonesia area, where they have Solanum ovigerum, and a lot of other small eggplants, in Spain, people have been breeding for hundreds of years, have been breeding eggplants to stay small so that they can pickle them. You can often buy pickled eggplant in a jar or in a can, and it's really delicious. I encourage you all to try it if you haven't yet. But yeah, they are that's as big as they're going to get, is they'll stay little. Did I want to say anything else about baby eggplants? Oh yeah, we actually looked into some of the genes that make these different compounds that are in ovigerum, that are the antihypertensive compounds. And it turns out that there might be a convergent reason that people have been breeding small varieties of eggplant that happen to have these really good compounds for you in them. And it's actually not because those compounds play an active role in reducing blood pressure of the plants, right? They don't have that issue, but they are compounds that have multiple functions. Those compounds, they help us reduce our blood pressure, but in the plants, they help reduce the plant fruit size expansion. So they'll actually be involved in cell wall cross-linking. So if you want your eggplants to be small and crunchy, then you actually would increase the prevalence of these antihypertensive compounds. So I love these types of, like, you think it's all for one purpose, but actually there's so many compounds are really Swiss Army knives. They do lots of different things. And I want to go back to bitterness and get on my high horse about this for just a second, because a lot of people think bitterness is usually poison. In this case, we're talking about bitter and saponins, and so that is actually bad stuff for you. But there's a lot of theories about bitterness when humans are super sensitive to bitter, because that was a way for us to detect poisons, and the bitter compound receptors in your tongue are at the back of your throat, so that it's the last chance, it's bullshit. It's complete bullshit. Okay. There is no correlation, and there's a good study that's come out last year, and I'm happy to send it to you guys. There is no correlation between bitterness and toxicity in plants that you can eat. And it turns out that bitter taste receptors, there's people that are more sensitive to bitter, like super tasters. And in Japan, most people are very sensitive to bitter. And then there's people that are not very sensitive to bitter, or we call them non-tasters. Most people in India are not very sensitive to bitter. And maybe that's because of adaptation to certain cuisines. Maybe it's because we had to compete with birds. Birds don't want to eat bitter food. If birds are going to take all your crop, then we better be less sensitive to bitterness so that we can grow bitter crops and eat them without any harm. The default for all animals, for all vertebrates at least, is bitter sensitivity. So most species can detect bitter. Our loss of bitter detection is an adaptation. And bitter receptors are not just on your tongue, they're also on your testicles. So they have functions in immune response and all sorts of other things. The Swiss Army knife, they don't just do one thing. And so we can throw out the idea that bitter sensitivity is because we're trying to eliminate poisons from our diet.
Very interesting.
Thanks. I'm on a mission to dispel that bitterness and toxicity have some relationship.
And we've got a comment in here. It looks like the Virginianum was a Linnaeus name, so that might explain why it might be not really make complete sense.
Thank you.
But yes, so if anybody doesn't have any more questions or comments, we'll be able to end a little early. people can go have some of their dinner before if they want to attend the Parks and Environment meeting. But thank you so much for giving this talk and including some of some appropriate spooky cannibal Halloween kind of stuff in there too.
If I disappear, it's because I found Ötzi in the freezer. Thank you all.
Thanks so much. I will keep you guys posted on the talk for next month. That'll be sent out soon. And again, thanks so much for coming. Have a great rest of the month, a great Halloween. And go try some eggplants.
And if you see Solanum viarum, kill it. Okay, thanks so much, you guys. I'll try to join for one of your next meetings. And thank you, Lydia.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go to that meeting now because it's only 3 o'clock here. Okay, bye.
Bye.